What's going on, everybody? We're back for yet another lap guide. This week we're going to be at Okayama. So track temps are a little warm for this week. We're looking roughly 85 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So the beginning of the session is definitely going to start out hot. It is in the later part of the day, so temps will decrease as the session goes on. Your warm up and your qualifying will be a little bit warmer than your actual race session. I bring that up only because driving the Porsche here, especially, it is a little bit tricky. With the track temps, the rear definitely wants to slide quite a bit. You can light up traction control pretty easily here. There's not a ton of grip to work with. Um, so, with that being said, we're definitely going to try to utilize a lot of patience here. We want to utilize a lot of late apexes, be very smooth with our steering, our throttle, our brake, blah, blah, blah. You guys are probably tired of hearing that from me by now. Now, getting into the lap, starting off with turn one. So, we have a couple different references to use for our braking zone here. Now, turn one is a very interesting corner. It's very tight on entry. You don't have a lot of track to really use to get the car turned into the apex, but the exit opens up on excuse me. The track opens up on exit, so we can actually get on throttle fairly soon, but we need to get the car in the right spot for the apex and make sure we're getting the correct rotation into there. So we have more or less three different references we can use for our T1 braking zone. We have our 100 board to use as a reference, and I would start braking prior to that. We also have the dirt patch on the left-hand side here. You can brake just after that starts, and then we also have the Dunlop sign, which we can start braking either right underneath or right before. Now coming into the corner, we can use this Marshall stand somewhat as a turn-in reference. Um, going back to it, it's just a reference. You can turn in a little bit later, turn in a little bit sooner. This is a pretty good spot for your turn in, and of course, if you're on a single monitor with a tighter FOV, this will be out of your line of sight when you want to turn in. Now we're going to get a pretty late apex here. We're going to miss the whole first portion of this curbing, and we want to make sure that we're touching the curb right towards the end of it. Again, because it opens up on the exit, we can start building our throttle right here, and there will actually be quite a bit of runoff room or track to utilize here. So we can get all the way to the left. We don't want to get so far out that we're dipping our left-hand side tires into the gravel here. That will make it tricky to get back to the right-hand side for turn two. So we get all the way back over to the right. You can upshift into fourth if you're carrying enough speed, and then downshifting into third might help with a little bit of rotation, but I did find it easier to stay in third gear here. We're going to use just a slight amount of trail braking pressure to get the car turned in. This will be a little bit of a middle to late apex depending on where you get the car landed. If you get the car rotated early enough, so we can kind of see the arc that we're following here. We're not quite following the line of, let's say, the white lines on the outside or the inside here. So we're actually going to turn in pretty aggressively. And then once we touch the curb, we can start building our throttle back up and come all the way out to the green patch here. You can also dip tires into the gravel slightly, but it will slow the car down a little bit. Because this is somewhat of a straightaway, we want to make sure that we're carrying as much speed as possible. So if you can avoid the gravel, that would definitely be best. Now coming into these little S's here, this is a little bit of a pinch point. If you're too wide through here, it seems like there's quite a bit of room to go too wide through this section. But I've seen quite a few times where you'll have a car here and your car on the right-hand side doesn't give you quite enough space, whether it be on the exit of this first section of the S's or even coming up into the curbing here. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's very easy to drive straight through here with a single car, but takes a lot of cooperation if you wind up going too wide. coming up to our next corner, we're going to use the 100 board as our reference. So this is a downshift from a 5th gear all the way to 2nd gear. You can use 3rd. It seems like 2nd's probably the better usage, though. It not only helps with rotation coming into the apex, but it gives you a little bit more of a drive out of the corner, especially in these hotter temps. 3rd gear is really, really tricky to use effectively coming up to this next corner. So we do want to turn in pretty late. Now it's hard to see here, but there is a pocket of camber right on the apex here. We can kind of see this darker patch of asphalt. If you get too far out to the left, your right side tires might be in a little bit of camber, and then your left side tires will either be on a totally flat surface or even slightly off camber. So that's going to make it very tricky to get the car turning. So we kind of want to follow this darker patch if you can see it with your graphic settings. If you can't see that darker patch with the graphic settings you're running, it's going to be a little tricky to find a turn-in point. But as we're coming in, let's say that we want to miss the first 25% of all of this curbing, land at the middle of the curbing, and then we can start tracking out on exit. Now once we're in that pocket of camber, we can actually be really aggressive with our throttle here. And that's for a couple different reasons. One, going back to this pocket of camber, that'll help grip the car back up. And then as soon as you leave that pocket of camber, we are headed uphill. So even though we're turning right, the car will grip up as it gets forced into the ground. And that'll give you plenty of mechanical grip to be really aggressive on the throttle. Now I do want to back up here slightly. So there are kind of two different lines that will work on exit here as well. If you're under attack, I actually like to keep it a little bit tighter here against this right-hand curb. And that lets me set up a little bit better of a defense line coming into this straightaway. I can be all the way to the right-hand side, and if somebody has a run on me, whether it was from a better exit or the draft, I can protect this inside line and force them to go around the outside. If you're not under attack, you can actually unwind the steering wheel ever so slightly and let the car float out towards the exit a little bit more. There's not going to be a huge benefit to this. It looks about a tenth from the apex all the way down the straightaway. And where that benefit's coming from is just taking a little of the steering angle out. You're not scrubbing as much speed as you go up the hill. So of course we're moving through our straightaway here. And as we come into the hairpin, obviously we want to be on the left-hand side here. There's also a couple different references we can use for the hairpin. So the first one, this fence post here sticks out more so than the other ones. It's a little bit thicker, so it should be pretty identifiable. And then of course we have our 100 board as well. So either one you can use, whichever one's easier to spot while you're driving. The 100 board, if we're braking right at that board, it's actually going to be too late. You're going to have a really hard time getting the car slowed down, especially if you're not utilizing, let's say, 100% brake pressure with a ton of ABS. You can do that. That is going to overheat your tires, though, and it's going to make the rest of your race laps a little bit more challenging. So I do prefer to start braking as soon as I get alongside this thicker fence post here. Coming into the corner, this is a little bit like the last corner we talked about. There is a massive pocket of camber here, so the sooner we get into this pocket of camber, the easier it'll be to keep the car in momentum. We're going to keep it nice and tight here, and then on exit, we can actually be really aggressive with our throttle again, even with a ton of steering angle here. We're coming up a hill, and again with a little bit of camber pocket. So the car is going to be forced into the ground once again. You're going to have a ton of mechanical grip, and you can be very aggressive on the exit here. Now something to keep in mind, we do not want to track all the way out to the far left. This is a scenario of we want to compromise our exit so that way we're setting up the entry for the next corner better. So we're going to get all the way back to the right hand side. And if you're not careful, this corner will catch you out. It comes up very, very fast. So as we crest this hill, we actually want to start preparing the car to get turned in and slow down for this corner. So you can see I get on the brakes. Now, because we're coming downhill, it can be extra tricky to get the car slowed down. Its natural momentum is going to want to continue pushing forward. So if we look at our brake input here, I have a slight little bit of brake pressure to help get the car slowed down, and then there's actually a secondary kind of jounce or pump of the brake pedal to help get the car slowed down and rotate it even further. Now we can use quite a bit of the apex here. You can actually get left side tires to dip into the grass. It'll help hook the car around the curbing a little bit to the left and make it a little bit easier to get through this corner. It also opens up the exit so we can get on throttle nice and early and get the power down. On exit, we can track all the way out to right side tires right at the limit of the green paint here. And then for our following left-hand corner, we actually want to get on this curbing, and we're almost going to follow the arc of this little last bit of white patch here. If you're turning in any sooner than the end of this curbing, it's actually a little bit too early, and you'll likely understeer off to the right-hand side on the exit. So the later apex we get here, the better. We can get right on that curb and again put our left side tires either right into the grass or try to hook them around the inside of this curbing. Power down super early, and then we can track out and our right side tires can go into the grass. If our left side tires get onto the red and white curbing here, I do believe that is an off track. So you have to be very careful with where that limit's at. And then coming up to our next corner, coming into the switchback hairpins. So I'm using the 50 board as a reference. You can also use this Enki sign. It's a little too early, but if you can get the timing right where once you pass the Enki sign, you can start getting on the brakes, that can definitely work. I like to brake just before the 50 board. So if we were to back this up a little bit. So I'm getting on the brakes here. And if we look at my cockpit, it is right on the right-hand side of my screen in my FOV. Now coming into this corner, we want to use the elevation gain again. We can get into the corner pretty early, and we're going to want to keep it pretty tight here. We can see I'm hand over hand with my steering angle, and I'm already starting to build throttle back up. So this is just another case of the car will get pushed into the ground, and we can utilize all of that mechanical grip. Now on exit, this is another example of we want to compromise our exit to help better set up our entry for the following corner. So I do track out fairly far to the right here, but I'm still leaving about a car's width all the way to the exit on the right hand side. You can get the car farther over to the left, and we're going to use very light to medium brake pressure to get the car slowed down. This is still uphill, so it's going to help us slow down the car naturally, but also help grip the car up on turning. Grab a little bit of a late apex here, even though I shamefully missed the apex by a couple feet. But again, we can get on throttle pretty early and pretty aggressively. And then as we get away from the curbing, we can unwind our steering wheel more and more. You can track all the way out, left side tires into the grass without an off track. Now this next corner is definitely a lot more tricky. I see a lot of people really struggle with this corner. So this is another one where it's very hard to time. So we can see just a little bit of a hill here. And as we get farther and farther, you can start to see it come downhill. And there's actually a little bit of camber at the apex next to the curbing. So when we back this up, the timing is to start turning the car in right before you crest this little hill here. And then as you start to come down and the car is pointed, we can get back on throttle. This is a little bit of a set and hold the throttle at a certain percentage. That's at least what's worked best for me. Now, if you delay how soon you get on throttle, you can actually get to 100% throttle, albeit a little bit later, coming into the corner. Now, I missed this one a little bit as well. Your right side tires can actually go between this yellow line in the curbing, so you can take a lot more of this track surface here to your usage. So ideally, we'd cut our right side tires right across here. And then on exit, we can get all the way to the left-hand side. Now, if you're hitting the curb all the way here, so let's say about middle of the exit, you didn't set the entry up quite right, and that's going to make it really challenging for the next corner. So ideally, when we track out, we should be naturally tracking out to the very end of the curbing. And then right as this curbing in the green patch ends is when I'm getting back on brakes, and shamefully I'm overlapping my pedals here, so don't do that. But we'll use medium to heavy brake pressure just to initially get the car slowed down, and then we'll need to use a little bit of trail braking pressure. This corner is downhill on entry, so it's especially needed for that trail brake to keep the front end gripped up and continue turning for us. We'll get all the way up against the curbing here. A good apex spot is right as this tire barrier starts to become visible. So we can see that tire barrier up against the concrete wall, and this would be a great spot to be winding up as an apex. And then we want to build our throttle up pretty gradually since we are still coming downhill. The car won't be 100%, it won't have a ton of mechanical grip. It'll naturally want to track out to the left-hand side here. So we want to be cautious and very patient with our throttle, build it up gradually. And then on exit, we can use all of the green and red and white curbing here. If you get left side tires into the gravel, you can get about a half of a tire over before you pick up an off track. Anything more than that, of course, that will be a track limits violation. And that's going to be our lap around Okayama. So once again, it's definitely a lot of late apexes, a lot of elevation and camber pockets that we need to utilize to our benefit. That's where all of the grip is going to be at. So obviously the more grip, the more speed we can carry through. A lot of it's timing too, so getting the car into those higher grip areas at the right time and at the right speed. This track can definitely be a little challenging in that regard. So be patient with it. Don't be afraid to explore and figure out different timing and different inputs and overlaps and yada yada yada. That's going to wrap us up for this week, and wish you guys the best of luck in officials.